We're going to start this next section with a little review of the unit circle, just so we've got it here and make sure we're starting to get it memorized. So what I've got here is I have the first quadrant of the unit circle here for you. And remember, we've learned that if you have the first quadrant, you really have all of them, because you just have to change the signs for whatever quadrant it's in. So what I'd like you to do is pause the video, fill in every point on the unit circle, and what radians go with that point. So pause the video, fill out those two things. Let's see how you did. So here's my first quadrant. I have all the radians, and then I also included the degrees for those three. So with that done, let's take a look at the next identity that we need to memorize. This is called the sum and difference identity for the cosine function. Now, we have a little memory trick to help us remember this. It is cosine changes the silly sign. So if we have cosine of one angle plus another angle, we do cosine of that angle, cosine of that angle. We change it to minus instead of plus. Let's do it this way. Add some color to it, help us get this down. And then we have sine of that angle, sine of the first angle, sine of the second angle. So we have cosine changes the silly sign. That gives you your CCSS. Cosine changes the silly sign. And like we said in the little memory trick, it changes sign from plus to minus. So same thing over here. Cosine changes the silly sign, and we change from minus to plus. And it's always the first angle, then the second angle for each of these patterns. So let's show you how we would use this. Let's say I want to find cosine of 15 degrees. However, 15 degrees is not on the unit circle, so I wouldn't be able to do this without a calculator, unless I change cosine of 15 degrees to be cosine of 45 degrees minus 30 degrees. Now, because this is a subtraction, I can do cosine changes, and I change the sign, the silly sign. Cosine changes the silly sign. Now, all of these are on the unit circle. Cosine of 45, cosine 30, sine of 45, sine of 30. And you can just reference that first quadrant of the unit circle that you drew up in the corner of your page. So you know cosine of 45 is 1 over root 2. Cosine of 30 is root 3 over 2. Sine of 45 is 1 over root 2. And sine of 30 is 1/2. Now, if I multiply these together, just multiply across. 1 times root 3 is root 3. And then I have root 2 times 2, which is 2 root 2. Plus 1 times 1 is 1 over 2 root 2. And we notice, hey, these have a common denominator. And we're done. So even though 15 degrees wasn't on our unit circle, we could use this cosine changes the silly sign to change it to unit circle values, which we can then find. So that's what I want you to try for B. So instead of 7 pi twelfths, I want you to change this to pi fourths plus pi thirds. 1/4 plus 1/3 is 7 twelfths. So apply the identity you just learned, cosine changes the silly sign, to this. Plug in those unit circle values because those are unit circle radians to find this answer. Pause the video, try that on your own, and then come back to check your work. Let's check your work. Cosine changes the silly sign, and he changed from adding to subtracting. Then I used my unit circle to answer those 4, simplified it down to get that. So let's do one last one. We're going to do a verifying of an identity, but we're going to still use cosine changes the silly sign because this is a subtraction. So cosine changes, and we change from minusing to adding, the silly sign. And I'm running out of room. Let's give myself one more room here. Now let's simplify what we can. I know that cosine of pi halves from my first quadrant is 0. I know sine of pi halves is 1. So 0 times cosine will go away, and 1 times sine is sine. And this is introducing us to our next set of identities. The next identities we're going to learn about are called the cofunction identities, and they come from something you noticed in chapter 2, that a lot of the graphs are the same graph, just shifted side to side a little bit. So if I take my cosine and sine wave and I shift it, I can make them match each other. And that's where this cofunction identity comes from. And we notice right here, these right here are our cofunction identities. So once again, a couple more things for you to memorize. The ones that I like to, how I memorize these is I notice the ones that are paired together. Sine is paired with cosine, secant is paired with cosecant, and tangent is paired with cotangent. And notice that inside it is always pi halves minus theta. So you get cosine of pi halves minus theta gives me sine, etc. for all of them. And those are your cofunction identities. In the next video, we're going to talk about the sum and difference identity, but for the sine function instead of the cosine function.